Have you ever felt that, no matter how much you gave of yourself, she seemed ever more distant? You were loyal. You were honest. You believed transparency would be enough. But suddenly you noticed a void that could not be explained in words. It wasn't a visible mistake, nor was it betrayal. It was something subtler. The sense that, even while by your side, she was no longer truly with you. This is where many men lose themselves. They believe rejection is born from a visible action, when in truth, it arises from an invisible frequency. Carl Jung said that what we fail to make conscious returns to us as fate in the game of relationships. What fails to become presence returns as abandonment. You weren't rejected simply by her. You were rejected by the emptiness you had allowed to grow inside yourself. When a woman distances herself, she isn't just looking at you. She is feeling the vibration you give off. Neuroscientifically, this is real. The human brain picks up emotional states even before words are spoken. When you hand yourself over chaotically, when you seek approval in every gesture, when you project onto her the responsibility of validating who you are, her body registers this as weight. It isn't irrational awareness. It's instinct. She doesn't think, this man depends on me. She feels, this man is not whole, and it is in this invisible field that attraction dies. Not because you weren't good enough, but because, at some point, you stopped being magnetic. Not because she didn't want you, but because you no longer wanted yourself enough. This is the internal conflict. Few men admit easily, you may be generous, devoted, even passionate, and still lose her respect. And here lies your greatest pain, not the loss of her, but the loss of your own vital energy. The pain of being unseen, even while present. The pain of realizing that your devotion was used against you. The pain of noticing that, while you were giving, she was only moving further away. Yet it is precisely within this pain that the key to transformation is hidden. Because what you interpret as rejection is, in truth, a mirror. She didn't step away simply because of what you did or didn't do. She stepped away because something within you had already stepped away from itself. This is the starting point, to recognize that what you call loss may actually be the beginning of recovering your presence. Once you begin to see the invisible game, everything changes. When you understand that the emptiness you felt in her was merely the reflection of the emptiness you refused to face within yourself, the game shifts, and that is when the revelation begins. The silence of the male void. You believed that by always being pleasant, patient, and available, she would feel safe by your side. Yet instead, with each approving gesture, each forced smile to avoid conflict, you grew less visible. What was meant to convey care began to sound like absence. The silence you sense from her isn't merely the distancing of a woman, but the echo of the void you let grow inside yourself. A woman doesn't move away from a man simply because he is kind. She moves away when she senses that his kindness is not an expression of strength, but a mask covering emptiness. And neuroscience explains it. The human brain responds more strongly to nonverbal energy than to words. When you constantly seek approval, your body emits signals of insecurity. She doesn't consciously interpret it, but she feels it. And that feeling creates the impression that you are not truly present, even while sitting beside her. This is the paradox. You think you are offering stability, yet what she perceives is absence of magnetism. You believe you are delivering peace, but she senses lifeless neutrality. The man who never contradicts, who never sets limits, who never dares to occupy space with his truth, dissolves until he disappears. At that point, you pass from partner to shadow. And that shadow weighs more than you realize. For the male void isn't a neutral space, it's a field that drains her energy. Emotional dependence doesn't scream, yet it consumes. It's like being in a silent room where the absence of sound becomes unbearable. To her, the lack of magnetism is more suffocating than the presence of conflict. What drives her away isn't your kindness, but the emotional silence screaming from your lack of stance. Jung said that what we fail to express in acts become symptoms. In relationships, the symptom is distance. She doesn't flee your kindness. He flees your incapacity to assert presence. Presence is not made of words, but of energy. It isn't about speaking louder or being aggressive, but about radiating the sense that you are whole in yourself. Without that, she never feels true security. You've probably noticed the difference when observing another man who, even without saying much, naturally filled the space. He didn't need rehearsed phrases, didn't need to repeatedly claim reliability. He simply was. And that being was enough to stir respect and desire. This isn't a divine gift, but the result of an inner solidity. A woman tests this state without realizing it. When she provokes, when she challenges your opinions, when she observes your silence, it isn't mere curiosity. It is her unconscious checking whether you truly exist in that space, or whether you will dissolve once again. When you bow, when you laugh at something you don't find funny just to keep the peace. When you retreat to avoid confrontation, you confirm the diagnosis, emptiness. And it is in that emptiness that you lose attraction. Not because she fails to value your kindness, but because that kindness is unsupported by strength. Masculine presence is the invisible axis that maintains the polarity of desire. Without it, the relationship becomes a lukewarm friendship, with no tension, no mystery, no life. The silence of the male void is the absence of a center. It is the man who lives to please, but never to be. And when that happens, no matter how much you strive, no matter how much you try to prove your worth, she will always feel something is missing. That something is not another man. That something is the whole of you. The moment you grasp this, the dynamic changes. The solution isn't to speak more, act more, or prove more. The solution is to recover your axis, to refuse dissolving in her expectation, to allow your presence to be a stable, silent, yet powerful field of energy. When you reclaim that center, the void disappears. And it is then that she feels something she cannot ignore. You have returned to existence. The weight of desperate desire. The gaze that lingers a few seconds too long. The message sent in the small hours. The urge to reply instantly just to prove you're present. You call it affection, but she feels it as intrusion. Excessive attention, instead of sparking desire, suffixes. What ought to convey care becomes a constant reminder that you are not enough on your own. Neuroscience shows that the human limbic system reacts powerfully to emotional pressure. When someone radiates neediness, the other experiences that energy as a burden to bear. It is as if each word, each gesture, each attempt at closeness doesn't bring comfort but instead reminds her that you require validation at every moment. To you, persistence is proof of love. To her, it is the weight of your dependence. She may smile at your frequent messages, but inwardly her body records them as projected anxiety. It's like being near someone breathing too fast. Without meaning to, you start to feel the tension. Your emotional urgency is contagious. What she senses is not warmth, but suffocation. You've noticed, haven't you, that the more you insist, the less she responds. The more you try to be present in every detail, the more distant she becomes. This is the paradox. Desire isn't born from constant reminders, but from the space absence creates to imagine. When you chase without pause, you leave no room for her to miss you. You occupy every crevice, and in that excess she loses the capacity too long. Psychology calls this negative reinforcement. The more you offer what is not asked, the greater the resistance you create. In time, your presence ceases to be pleasant and becomes a burden. She doesn't flee your affection, she flees the emotional weight attached to it. Every desperate gesture isn't read as love, but as insecurity. And here is the truth few men face. Female desire does not bloom in the shadow of neediness. It blossoms in the field of choice. When you place yourself as one begging for attention, you annihilate the polarity of the game. There is no longer the healthy tension of will he choose me? There is only the certainty that, no matter what she does, you'll be there, and what is guaranteed loses its value. That is why men, who show interest without urgency, appear more attractive. It isn't about playing games, but about not carrying in your body the anxiety of loss. When you convey that your life doesn't halt if she doesn't reply, that you don't lose your axis if she pulls away, her body reads it as stability, and in that stability, desire is born. Think of how often you believed that persistence would eventually bring the result you wanted, yet the more you pursued, the more she withdrew. The truth is, desire cannot be forced, it can only be sparked, and the spark arises from balance between presence and absence, between availability and mystery. She doesn't step away because you love her, she steps away because your love arrived wrapped in emotional demand. Each message you send to soothe your inner anxiety functions like a chain binding the air around her, and no one breathes easily when chained. Reclaim your place of choice, not as a pursuer, not as an emotional beggar, but as a man who, even while desiring, does not lose himself in desperation. The desire that attracts is sustained by the absence of urgency. It is the energy of a man who looks into her eyes and transmits, without words, I want you, but I don't need you to exist. When you reach that vibration, the dynamic shifts, the weight disappears. She no longer feels she is carrying your insecurities, but senses the strength of someone who doesn't beg, but chooses. And at that moment, paradoxically, the very absence you feared becomes the bridge that draws her back. The hidden fragility of comparison. Have you noticed how, when looking at other men, something within you begins to corrode? Perhaps you saw the colleague more daring, the friend more relaxed, the stranger who naturally held women's attention. And, in that moment, what should have been mere observation became a mirror of inferiority. It wasn't he who drove her away. It was the reflection you carried in your chest. The issue isn't the presence of other men. The issue is how you measure yourself against them. Each time you place yourself on the scales of comparison, you hand her the map of your insecurity. She doesn't need words to perceive it. The body speaks, the eyes betray, the posture reveals. A woman senses the fragility of the man who doesn't feel enough. Psychology calls this social inference, the way we interpret our value through the environment. When you look at another man and think, he is better than me, you are in practice lowering your own energy. That self-devaluation doesn't remain trapped in your mind, it translates into behavior. You avoid asserting yourself, lose naturalness, attempt to compensate with artificial gestures, and she senses something within you isn't whole. No woman wants to be the mirror of your insecurity, because, deep down, that places her in an uncomfortable role. If she notices you diminish yourself, she feels compelled to carry the burden of validating you. And no relationship sustains that weight for long. You might believe you are being honest by showing your vulnerability, but what she sees is the absence of firmness in someone who should inspire confidence. When you measure yourself against the standard of another man, you lose your singularity. It's like trying to wear armor never forged for your body. Instead of protection, it brings discomfort. That discomfort is perceptible. Your words don't sound authentic. Your energy doesn't hold. Your presence dissolves. And a woman isn't drawn to a character, but to the living essence of someone who doesn't need to imitate to exist. Think of how many times you tried to reproduce another man's gestures, lines, or attitudes, believing it would spark desire. Perhaps it worked for moments, but it didn't last. Because it wasn't you. Because, deep down, every gesture revealed a performance, not a real presence. And when the mask slips, trust evaporates. The fragility of comparison lies precisely here. You don't lose because the other is better. You lose because you failed to occupy the space of your own uniqueness. Attraction isn't about being the boldest, the most outgoing, the most talkative. It is about being whole in what you are, without needing to measure each step against another man. Jung said, "The shadow is everything we haven't recognized within ourselves." When you see in another man what you admire and feel pain, that pain is the reflection of your unintegrated shadow. It isn't he who threatens you, but the part of you you've never dared to express. And the woman senses this invisible struggle. She feels there is a piece of you hidden behind comparison. But here is the liberating truth. Female desire doesn't demand you be all men. It only demands you be whole in yourself. She doesn't step away because you aren't as daring as the other. She steps away because you never allowed yourself to recognize your own form of magnetism. Comparison strips you of the silent authority born of authenticity. Stop seeing the other as a threat. The other is only a threat when you are absent from yourself. When you occupy your space, when you speak without fear of displeasing, when you laugh because you genuinely found it funny, when you look without seeking approval, there is no competition. For magnetism doesn't arise from rivalry, but from integrity. The moment you cease measuring yourself, the energy shifts. What was fragility becomes solidity. And that solidity is felt instantly. The woman doesn't just see what you do, she senses the energetic field of a man who doesn't need to prove or justify himself. That is the man who attracts, not because he tries to be more than others, but because he doesn't need to be anyone else to exist. The invisible game of incoherence. You speak of confidence, but hesitate when the situation demands firmness. You say you know what you want, but retreat at the smallest sign of disapproval. This silent incoherence doesn't need to be spoken. It emerges in gestures, silences, in the pauses where you collapse before a simple testing glance. It is in this invisible space that she perceives that what you show isn't what you sustain. Women test without full awareness that they are testing. It is instinct verifying whether your strength is real or merely declared. When you claim security yet tremble when contradicted, her body registers a mask. When you declare firmness but change opinion merely to avoid discomfort, she senses your confidence isn't solid but performative. And no desire can survive when masculine energy dissolves at the lightest touch. Incoherence isn't only in speech but in energy. You might smile and say you are calm, yet if your eyes reveal anxiety, she perceives it. You may swear you don't care, but if you reply instantly, hungry for validation, she knows. Attraction evaporates when there is discrepancy between what you declare and what you radiate. This is the invisible game. It doesn't matter what you say, it matters what you sustain in silence. Neuroscience of emotions shows the human brain detects incongruence in milliseconds. Tone of voice, breathing, rhythm of words, all reveal when you are unaligned. You think you hide it, but the body betrays you. And it is then her trust breaks. Not because you failed in some grand way, but because you let slip small signs that your presence wasn't solid. Distance doesn't occur in scandal, but in subtlety, in the wavering gaze, the word that contradicts posture, the awkward laugh at a test. She needn't point it out. She simply senses something isn't true. That is why some men, even without great displays, retain female respect. They don't promise more than they sustain. They don't claim confidence, they live as though they are. They don't need to prove firmness because their whole being transmits it. They don't fall into incoherence because they aren't trying to play a role. They are aligned with who they are. The opposite is the man who wears different masks for each situation. Too kind, to please, too rigid, to compensate, too playful, to distract. None of these versions are consistent. And, in the end, incoherence shouts she perceives there is no center, only desperate adaptation to what she expects. And no one desires a man who lives to uphold roles. Jung said the mask, the persona, is necessary, but when it becomes the only face, the man loses his essence. That is what happens in incoherence. You dissolve in the need to be accepted, and the woman leaves because she cannot trust something rootless. Incoherence doesn't only kill desire, it kills security. But there is a way out. The path isn't to appear coherent, but to align what you feel, think, and do. Not to declare confidence, but not to tremble when she tests. Not to claim stability, but to breathe and remain whole when she provokes instability. Coherence isn't speech, but continuous energy. When you become coherent, she senses it. Even if she disagrees, even if she challenges your ideas, something in her relaxes. Because deep down, she doesn't seek perfection, but consistency. Desire blooms when she perceives that, no matter what she does, you don't collapse. Not because you are cold, but because you are whole. The instant you abandon masks and become aligned, incoherence vanishes, and with it, so does her withdrawal. What was once fragility transforms into silent confidence. It is within that solid silence that she finds what she unconsciously sought, a man who sustains his own ground, the silent mirror of female indifference. Her distance isn't only about her, it is a reflection of you. When a woman becomes indifferent, it isn't because her feelings suddenly died, but because the energy that once drew her has disappeared. Indifference is the mirror showing how far you have strayed in the effort to win her. You think her silence is punishment, but in truth, it is revelation. It reflects the point at which you stopped being visible. Not visible in body, but in energy. You remain physically present, yet no longer radiate the force that once held her close. Indifference doesn't stem from outright rejection. It stems from absence of magnetism, and here lies the hardest truth. When you chase her in this state, you reinforce the reflection she projects of you. Each desperate gesture confirms the image of a man lacking inner power. What could have been space for longing turns instead into space for contempt. Relationship psychology shows human beings respond more to contrast than constancy. If you withdraw consciously, you create contrast. But if you remain present while ignored, you generate predictability. Her brain ceases to react, her body ceases to respond, her heart ceases to stir. At that moment, indifference hardens, and what hurts is not only her distance, but the silent echo of realizing you are no longer at the center of your own life. For deep down, her indifference merely shows how you stopped prioritizing yourself. While your focus was fixed on chasing her, you forgot you. While you ran after every signal of hers, you lost your own internal signals. This is the hidden mirror. The emptiness you sense in her is only the absence of presence in yourself. The indifferent woman is not the cause, but the consequence. She simply reacts to the field you emit. And when that field is dependence, pleading, or submission, the answer is always withdrawal. But there is another way, not of pursuit, nor of hatred. It is the path of inner rescue. Instead of wasting energy trying to regain her attention, reinvest in yourself. Reoccupy your space. Recreate your routine with the strength of one who needs no approval to exist. Rediscover the vibration of a man who does not bow to indifference, but becomes so solid he cannot be ignored. When you do this, something shifts, not because she suddenly rushes back, but because your presence returns to the center. The energy reorganizes. You don't need to say you've changed, for she feels it. The field doesn't lie. Her indifference begins to lose strength, not because you persuaded her, but because, before a whole man, she can no longer sustain absence. The woman who leaves is not simply a loss. She is a silent reminder that, at some point, you abandon yourself. And paradoxically, the return to your own essence may be the very path that rekindles in her what seemed dead. For desire isn't born of pursuit. It is born of presence. And when you return to your axis, indifference has no ground left to stand upon. Nothing you lost was definitive. Every withdrawal, every silence, every indifference was only a reflection of what you needed to see in yourself. The void that hurt, the weight that suffocated, the comparison that wounded, and the incoherence that exposed, all were calls for you to return to your axis. Not to become another man, but to finally inhabit your own presence. The invisible game was never about her. It was always about how much you sustain your energy without losing yourself. Once you reclaim the center, desire returns to existence, not as begging, but as choice. And at that point, her indifference ceases to be a threat and becomes just another broken mirror along the way.